What's up, everyone? It's the Autistic Scyther here, and this is part 2 of Top 10 Sword Fighters in Video Games. That being said, for anyone that wants to see part 1, it's up now on my channel, so I suggest you basically go watch that, then come back to that after that, come back to this video after you're done for numbers 5 to 1. So without further ado, and now that that's done, without further ado, let's get back into it. Moving on next at number 5, we have Auron from Final Fantasy X. That being said, when it comes down to Final Fantasy, I have played through 5 Final Fantasy games in the entire franchise. Those being 10, 12, 4, 6, and 7. And honestly, I had a hard time figuring out which character would end up in the game. And in all fairness, I was considering both the likes of Cecil and Cloud for this one. However, I then remembered Auron, and I was like, yeah, that definitely makes more sense than anything else. And honestly, of course it does make sense. I mean, the first time we see him, he's basically standing on the bridge in Zanarkand, just looking as badass as he can be. And yeah, if you thought Magnus was badass, then Auron is that times 10, which is kind of awesome. Especially since he's able to more or less wield his sword with just one arm. Like flawlessly with one arm. The other arm tucked within his cloak. And honestly, in all fairness, he really fits the title of Grizzled Swordsman, since he basically acts as a mentor towards Tidus and the rest of the cast of Final Fantasy X. Since he's been on the same sort of journey before with Tidus' father, Jecht. Before you're asking, I was going to consider Tidus. However, I would have gotten some flack from the entire Final Fantasy community because they basically hate Tidus' laugh in the game. And again, I would gain some hate from people from the Fire Emblem community for liking Fire Emblem Fates. Anyway, that being said, considering Auron's sword style, his style is basically similar to that of a samurai. A Ronin, which is a masterless samurai, mind you, but a samurai nonetheless. Down to his overdrive attack being Bushido. Gotta admit, it's kind of awesome to say the least. Moving on next at number 4, we have the Honedge line from Pokemon. Alright, for those that already don't know, I love Pokemon. But for those that don't exactly know, Unova, or Generation 5, is my favorite generation of Pokemon. So, honestly, I had a kind of an interesting time with the first 5 generations of sword-wielding Pokemon that could be considered. However, that didn't compare to when Generation 6 Pokemon were introduced. And none more than Honedge. I mean, sure, we've had Pokemon that would more or less seem like they would use swords in battle, like Farfetch or the Oshawott line. But as soon as I saw Honedge, I was like, oh my god, this is awesome. Basically, it's a living sword. And a living sword that can drain your life force if you accidentally grab your hilt. I mean, if you accidentally grab its hilt, using the sash attached to it. That is morbid and hardcore, And honestly, I love it. Additionally, considering how it's a sword, yeah, it basically focuses on a lot of slashing or slicing attacks. Like stuff you would do with a sword. Like slash, fury cutter, aerial ace, sword stance, cut, and even sacred sword. Which, honestly, as a sword Pokemon, you knew that would make sense. And it gets even further once you consider when Hoenn evolved form, Doublade was introduced. Which basically just goes from one sword to two swords. And yeah, what's better than one sword than two swords? However, we weren't prepared when Aegislash was introduced. Because oh my god, this thing is awesome. Just being a sword and shield in one. Even down to its signature move being King's Shield. A move that can lower an opponent's physical attack. Honestly, this is actually pretty cool. Makes it kind of a threat in competitive. If Landorus T wasn't there. Plus, the fact that Aegislash is able to lead kings, has been able to known to lead beyond the team of kings, really says a lot. And honestly, every time I play through X and Y, I always try my best to get a Honedge. And this time, yeah, you know I'm gonna do the exact same thing once I get Pokemon Legends ZA. Moving on next, at number 3, we have Meta Knight. Now I've played 4 Kirby games, and honestly, I've never dealt with Meta Knight as a boss. But when it comes down to it, honestly, Meta Knight is the perfect example or the perfect one for a sword fighter's list. As, honestly, he's basically just Kirby's main rival, who kind of looks like him. Plus, he's a masked character, which adds to a bit of mystery. That being said, every time Kirby basically faces off against him, he more or less acts like an honorable fighter and leaves a sword on the ground for Kirby to pick up so he can fight him on an equal footing. And considering how powerful Meta Knight is, due to moves like Shuttle Loop or many of his intricate maneuvers with his signature sword Galaxia, yeah, it kind of makes sense. That being said, even when seen as an ally or playable character, he has a lot of moments that actually proves how good he is. I mean, heck, even in Kirby Triple Deluxe, Planet Robobot, he basically ends up fighting against him through the entire game, to the point where he eventually ends up facing off against Galaxia Knight, basically as an effort to face off against the strongest swordsman in the galaxy. Yeah, he faces off against a strong foe in order to become the strongest in the galaxy. That's pretty awesome. Even further, in Planet Robobot, the Haltman Corps are so fascinated by him that they end up creating a somewhat mechanized version of him in order to face off against Kirby, basically serving as sort of a security system. Yeah, you know you're basically famous when big business makes a mechanized version of you to serve as a security guard. And heck, the less that we mention about Kirby and the Forgotten Lands appearance in Arena Z, which honestly has the most epic appearance from him out of anything. Really does say the least. Also, I gotta mention Kirby Right Back At Ya, and how Eric Stewart is a legend, especially with him adding a bit of a Spanish accent to his voice. Kinda cool. Moving on next at number 2, we have Lyn and Felix from the Fire Emblem franchise. Yeah, I had a lot of... The Fire Emblem franchise was one of the hardest ones, as I had several great sword fighters that could basically fit for this list. And it just led to going between Lyn and Felix. So, and to the point that I had a hard time deciding between both of them. So, why not both? And honestly, it makes sense. Starting off with Lyn, she starts off as a Saiyan tribeswoman of the Lorca tribe, who basically is living on her own after her tribe was more or less massacred by bandits. That being said, as soon as she discovers that she's a noblewoman of the noble canton of Caelin, she eventually makes her journey to meet the grandfather that she never knew, as well as take her place as a noblewoman. And heck, even lending a hand to Eliwood and Hector as they face off against Nergal and his group, the Black Fang. And the fact she's the first lord that we're introduced to here in the West really says a lot. Plus, she does gain access to a solid ranged option with bows, as well as her signature swords, the Monikati and Solkati. So, yeah. As for Felix, yeah, Fire Emblem Three Houses is a little bit more interesting, considering you can make any student, any class, or any character in the game any class. However, Felix is largely known for being locked to the Myrmidon class line, going up to Swordmaster and Mortal Savant. And it kind of fits him since he dedicates his life to the blade, spending so many times sparring and honing his craft. That being said, even with him being somewhat estranged from his father after his brother's death, yeah, he basically proves how strong he is, to the point that he gets even stronger when he gets his hand on his house's signature relic, the Aegis Shield, as well as the Sword of Meralta. So, yeah. Honestly, both kind of fit. Also, it doesn't hurt the fact that Felix is one of the best units every time I play through Fire Emblem Three Houses. That's just me. Moving on to number 1, we have Link from The Legend of Zelda. Of course, you knew this was coming. He's Link, the wielder of the Master Sword. Honestly, kind of makes sense. If you play any Zelda game, you know he makes sense. Sword beams, sword plants, sword spins. He's a sword fighter no matter what. And honestly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Link, period. Honestly, I have nothing more to say. He just speaks for himself. That being said, that's my top 10 favorite sword fighters in video games. Like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.